Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. Appreciate you joining me for another documentary review. This particular documentary was one that was recommended by one of you. Appreciate the recommendations. I enjoy watching documentaries, and I definitely enjoyed watching this one. This particular documentary is called On Earth as It Is in Heaven. This documentary was done by Nathan Anderson, and it is about post-millennialism. And this documentary is, it does not claim to have answered all the questions one might have, or it doesn't claim to give full proof of postmillennialism. It was mainly to start a conversation, it says at the end. And the reality is you really can't lay out a full system of eschatology in a 2-hour documentary. But I do think it did a good job of introducing people to postmillennialism so they can understand what it is. And postmillennialism is something that just a little over a year ago, I was not real familiar with. I've had a couple different discussions on this program about postmillennialism. Forgive me as I struggle saying that term. But I have had Tyler Baker on the program, who is a postmillennialist. I've also had Doug Wilson, who is featured on this documentary, and he's talked about postmillennialism. And so after having those conversations, watching some other videos in the past, I do feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the basic premise of postmillennialism, where before I did not. And so I would agree that if somebody is wanting to be introduced to postmillennialism, this documentary would definitely do that for them. It would kind of show the basic premise of it. And I do. As somebody who does not believe in postmillennialism, I think it's important that I understand it if I want to actually prove it wrong. Most people in the Baptist world, they just disagree with it. And so their method of proving it wrong is just intimidating everyone away from it by just saying crazy things about it and misrepresenting it. The problem is, if you have anyone in your audience who has a brain, they're just going to find out that you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. And I definitely don't want my audience thinking that about me. So I try to be honest when it comes to these things. And so I enjoyed this documentary. It definitely, while it didn't teach me what postmillennialism was, because I think I already understood that, it definitely helped me understand how they interpret a few passages. And it did bring up some intriguing things that I will discuss as we go through this. But I don't think, though, there was anything that this documentary showed me that revealed any maybe misconceptions or misperceptions that I could have about postmillennialism. I think it confirmed that my view was accurate. The main people that I had on the documentary was Doug Wilson, who I mentioned. I've had him on the program before. I had Steve Gregg. I've seen several videos. I've seen some of his debates. He's often on Standing for Truth's channel doing debates, and I've always found the stuff that I've listened to very sound from him, very intriguing. Even some things where I would disagree with him, always interesting, very, very intriguing. Kenneth Gentry was also on here. I've read his book, When Jerusalem Fell. I've attempted to get him on the program before, and I never got a response from him. But the reason I looked him up and I read his book, I did a while back looking into when the book of Revelation was written. And everyone that I would come across who claimed the early dating of Revelation, they all referred to his book. And so I had to check it out. I've wanted to have him on the program to discuss the dating of the book of Revelation, and I've not been able to make that happen. If anybody's got any connections to him, tell him he needs to come on the Spirit of Prophecy program. He is invited, and I would like to discuss that subject with him. But Bruce Gore was also on here. I've had many people request that I get him on the program. One of these days I'm going to. I have not taken the time to reach out to him, but some of his videos I've seen. I've enjoyed those as well. And maybe we can get him on the program to talk about postmillennialism and maybe even some of the things that I bring up in this particular review. But all that to just say, while there are several things with these men where I would disagree with them, I also find all of them very interesting. These guys all have made me think when I've listened to them. I like that. And the reality is, if I was going to try to give myself the greatest challenge and go up against 4 men, making the challenge as tough as possible, I would probably choose those 4 guys. I was familiar with all 4 of them. So in this documentary, one of the things it does on there that will drive you nuts a little bit if you're a futurist like myself or a premillennialist like myself is it has some quotes from good old John Hagee. Everybody uses John Hagee when making fun of anything pre-tribulational, pro-Zionist. We do the same thing. We use John Hagee. And while nobody wants to claim John Hagee, it is true that your average premillennial, pre-tribulational Christian sounds just like him on eschatology. And let me just say this, every line that they use from John Hagee on here, you will hear in your typical independent fundamental pre-tribulational Baptist church. Obviously, the things he said we disagree with, even though we're premillennial, but I do, admit most premillennialists believe exactly what John Hagee was saying in those clips in the documentary. And so the main eschatology that went against on this documentary was dispensational premillennialism, which is what most evangelicals believe. It went against pre-tribulational teaching. And obviously we are against dispensationalism. We are against pre-tribulation on this program. But there are areas where the makers of this documentary would be opposed to us and where we are in agreement with the dispensational crowd. And I know we don't want to line up with them on anything, but we do. And so that while we don't like seeing our side connected with them, just understand they are a majority of the premillennialists out there. So we're kind of stuck with them, and we're always going to have a lot of their nonsense associated with us. And that's a shame, but it's just the reality of the situation. And so there were a few things in this documentary that they connected to dispensationalism, or they credited dispensationalism for creating that teaching, and things that I would agree with. But again, I think I'm not going to credit dispensationalism for those things. I just think we happen to agree with them, kind of like sometimes we agree with Catholics on things. But please do not call Trinitarian thinking Catholicism or something like that. And so while I don't like hearing a lot of these things, again, I do have to admit there are areas where we agree with the dispensationalists. And so they did point out many foolish things about dispensationalism. But understand, misproving dispensationalism does not mean you've proven premillennialism wrong. People can have a horrible system that they use to prove a true doctrine. Most people go to the scriptures looking for proof texts of what they've already decided is true. And when people misuse scripture to prove a true doctrine, the reality is they end up just discrediting that doctrine. So we got to make sure, even if our main position is right, we want to use the scriptures accurately when presenting that to people, because we don't want to do damage to any truth. So in this documentary, it showed some clips from The Thief in the Night and talked about a lot of the thief in the night foolishness that we pick on in this program too. It showed a Larry King interview with Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, which are the ones who wrote the Left Behind series. And pre-tribbers, you don't have a right to get upset about that, because you teach exactly the same things those guys were talking about. They did make a distinction between the dispensational premillennialist and non-dispensational premillennialist. And it had to do this because, without a doubt, premillennialism has been a thing since the early church. You can read about it in Eusebius. He was against it, but he was talking against it because people were teaching it way back then. And even Irenaeus, you can see references to it that sounds very much like premillennialism. And so it has always been around. However, what they did is, and I never heard this spin before, they said it was a thing in the early church because of Jewish influence that was still around during that time. And I never really heard that spin before, but that was interesting to me, because obviously the Jews were wrong about a lot of things. And so they're acting like that's how it got into the early church. That was kind of a new thing to me. But anyway, before I get into some of the intriguing things about the film that got me thinking, I do want to mention a couple things I often say, but these things need to be repeated. And one is that Bible prophecy is difficult. It is very hard to prove conclusively, things to come. Okay, now it's not hard to prove Jesus is coming back. It's not hard to prove a future resurrection, future judgment, things like that. Those things are not hard to prove. However, when it comes to just a lot of the details about how things are going to play out that we are obviously and rightfully interested in, those things are difficult. And we've been fighting about these things for centuries. And I think that's okay, as long as we're just not, too quick to call somebody unsaved or a heretic because they disagree with us on some of those things. At the end of the day, when it comes to a lot of these other side issues involved with it, nobody's ever really fully proven how they interpret everything. They can make interesting cases. We can listen to how they present what they think is going to come, and we can decide whether or not that sounds good and that's what we want to go with. But in many places where they went to the scriptures on this program, it made sense, but it didn't all line up with my beliefs. Okay? And in the futurist world, we often debunk other interpretations by comparing their interpretation with our interpretation. Well, they can't be right about this because that goes against what we believe over here. Well, wait a minute. Are we sure about what we believe over here? We use a lot of circular reasoning, not in the futurist world, but I guess in the premillennial world. And I think they did some of that too. Just because something they say doesn't line up with our charts doesn't mean it's not consistent with the Bible. No, most charts that are out there, if not all charts that are out there, it's what people believe the Bible indicates is going to take place and the order that the things are going to take place. But we don't really know for sure. And we're not wrong to search and to try to figure it out and to be interested. But we need to acknowledge that some things we just might not know for sure about until it actually happens. In the meantime, we should probably focus on what we're supposed to be doing now, which is something we'll talk about here in just a minute. But where we are sure, again, is Jesus coming back, but the postmillennialists believe that too. We're sure about a resurrection. They believe that too. And so while I said before, I'm familiar with postmillennialism, that doesn't mean I understand how they interpret every scripture. When you hear other versions of eschatology, there will be many questions of, well, what about this passage? That, you're going to have those questions. After listening to this documentary, there were many examples of that. Well, what about this? And they, as they said in the documentary, this doesn't answer everything, but hopefully it will get a conversation started. And I hope to have more conversations on this. But the more we learn about the other positions and how they interpret other passages, the more we can understand their view and possibly show their errors, or maybe see where ours are at. And so there was a couple things they brought up that were intriguing to me because I hadn't heard these passages explained in the way that they did before. And it got me thinking. And I like anything that gets me thinking. Most people today, when they talk about eschatology, they're basically telling you, quit thinking, listen to what I say, just agree with my chart, sign on to it. And they're kind of like terms and conditions that nobody wants to read through all that, but y'all click, I agree. And that's kind of how most eschatology is. They give you a whole bunch of stuff and they just tell you, just click that you agree, click that you agree. Okay, I agree. And then, later it gets held against us that we agreed to those terms and conditions, but we never really read them. And so it's kind of the same thing with eschatology. I think that's a good illustration. But some intriguing things they brought up. One, they completely deny a future temple that's going to come. And again, while I would agree with that the dispensationalists are wrong and how they interpret many things about a future temple, I didn't think their explanation was that strong either. For example, they talked about the Ezekiel temple in chapters 40 through 48. I've heard what dispensationalists say about that, and I believe it's completely foolish. I've done whole programs about what I think on that, which I'm not going to get into. I personally think my explanation is the best, and if I thought there was a better one, I would go with that one. But either way, I didn't think their explanation was that strong either. However, while I do not believe in any kind of future temple where there will be sacrifices sanctioned by God, I do hold to the idea of a future temple that will be built by the Antichrist, where he will set his image up and declare himself to be God. That has always been my position, even though, too, I've always been open to the possibility that that might not happen. I don't think it has to happen. That's my opinion. That's how it will take place. But their interpretation of 2 Thessalonians 2, I thought was interesting because they brought up a point. This is what made me think I hadn't thought of before. But every other time the Apostle Paul references a temple, he's not talking about a physical temple. He's talking about our body. 1 Corinthians 3:16 says, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are." So he referred to them as being the temple. And I don't know, I imagine what Paul taught the Corinthians, he probably taught the Thessalonians too. 2 Corinthians 6:16, "And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." 2 Corinthians 6:17, "Wherefore come out from among them, be ye separate, saith the Lord, touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you." Ephesians 2:20, "And are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit." So right there in Ephesians, he's referring to them as being the temple. Then 2 Thessalonians 2. He says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he is God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things." Now, we don't know for sure what all he was referring to there because we were not there. This was written to the church in Thessalonica, not to Liberty Baptist Church. But he had taught them some things about the son of perdition, about the temple of God. And I'm just saying, and they were just kind of saying, if he was using the temple of God reference there in the same way he was everywhere else, it could have been a reference maybe to an apostasy, which is what he's talked about. So we need to be open to different possibilities is all I'm saying. So again, if they start rebuilding a temple, you know what? I'm going to think something's about to happen. But you know what? At the same time too, the temple's not being rebuilt right now. I'm still ready for Christ's return because we know we're supposed to always be ready for Christ's return. I'm not going to wait until I see a temple be getting rebuilt before I get ready for Christ's return because I'm not positive about my view of things to come. I am positive about what I'm supposed to do now, and I'm supposed to be ready. So again, we should be able to have conversations about these things. We should even be able to disagree. But at the end, also, Bruce Gore, he mentioned that Revelation 19 is not the second coming. And that kind of surprised me. I had not heard Revelation 19 interpreted in the way he did. I'm not going to go into all of that. Watch a documentary, hear how he explains Revelation 19. I went back and I read Revelation 19 again, trying to think the way he was, and I was really struggling to make it fit. I really felt like that was a stretch. I'd love to have him on the program to talk about that. He'd be more than welcome to do that. That would be an interesting conversation. But there were several places where it did feel like they were reading their eschatology into the scripture in the same way the premills do. I can't accuse them of doing anything that our side doesn't do. The way Doug Wilson explains, straight is a gate, narrow is a way that leads to life, and broad is a way that leads to destruction. I felt like he was reading his eschatology in there. There were several examples of that, but at the same time, just because his interpretation does not line up with our view of things doesn't necessarily mean he's wrong. We tend to do the same thing. But I do want to briefly, in closing, talk about what I like about postmillennialism. Because while I disagree with it, there are certain things I like about it. And when you watch this documentary, when you hear them describe their vision of the future, it's pretty exciting. I like it. In many ways, I think it'd be great if they were right. They are expecting very good things. Where in the dispensational premillennial world, we're expecting everything to go to pot. And that's not right. I just showed on a previous episode a clip of a pastor talking about foolish things our nation is doing that's going to hurt our nation. And after he goes through all these things, he basically tells everybody to get excited because it just means we're about to check on out of here. The fact that we are doing destructive things in our nature, he got everybody excited about it because it means Jesus is about to come back. It's like, wait a minute, aren't we in charge of the vineyard? Is that how we want him to find our country when he comes back? But in the premillennial world, because we have such a negative view of things, we've just kind of gone into retreat, and we are retreating from everything. I don't think that's right. I love the optimism of postmillennialism, and I hate the pessimism of premillennialism. I believe the postmillennialists, are correct in their attitude while wrong in their eschatology. And understand, and hear me out in this next statement, and the truth of this statement that I'm about to make. Its truth is dependent on whether or not I'm correct on premillennialism. Okay? But I think the error of postmillennialism has actually caused them to be obedient in areas where most premillennialists are in disobedience. This does not mean premillennialism's wrong. It just means we are disobedient. For example, people often blame the belief of once saved, always saved on Christians being carnal. And understand, Christians being carnal, that just means they're disobedient. It doesn't mean once saved, always saved isn't true. This documentary, it promotes Calvinism. Okay? We are very non-Calvinist here. And we on our side likes to blame Calvinism on the lack of soul winning in a lot of churches. But many Calvinists would tell you, and many Calvinists have told me, that Calvinism does not tell people not to win souls. They would tell you people who don't win souls are just disobedient. So again, just because premillennialists are disobedient, it does not mean that premillennialism is wrong. But because premillennial and even some amillennial eschatology teaches everything going to the dogs before Christ comes back, I believe that belief, while possibly correct in some ways, it's causing Christians to be disobedient in areas where postmillennialists are obedient. We are supposed to be trying to make this world a better place. We are supposed to be the salt of the earth. We are supposed to be teaching all nations. And I believe God wants us to succeed. And I loved in here how they talked about some of the old missionaries and just how forward thinking they were. They talked about guys like David Livingstone, who the work that he did, he understood he would probably never see the fruit of the work that he was doing. He understood that he was paving the way for something that would probably see great fruit hundreds of years in the future. And back then, they were forward thinking. They thought about the future. We do not, especially as Americans. In our American culture, we have a very doomsday mindset about everything. And I think that's a shame. And I think that's wrong. I believe we should be forward thinking. And I'm not going to take time to cover my version of what I call optimistic premillennialism. I've talked about that in the past. But let me just say, when it comes to the goals and the visions of the post-mill crowd, all I can say is I hope they succeed. When it comes to the goals and the vision of the premillennial crowd, I hope they fail. Because the post-mills are preparing for success, where the pre-mills are planning for failure. So I hope we fail and they succeed and we evangelize the world. I believe the subject of the millennium is an important subject, and those of us in the premillennial world, we need to understand we don't have all the answers when it comes to this thing. there are definitely areas where we're wrong and we need to be obedient, behave better. And I hope to have more conversations about this in the future, because I think there are valuable conversations that we can have about this thing. And so stop just clicking I agree to the terms and conditions of different theologies and then just going out there and fighting to the death for those things. No, actually study them out, actually read the terms and conditions of these things and seeing if they are something that you can agree to. And let's have some real conversations. Let's challenge ourselves in these areas. And either way, while we might not ever figure out for sure what's going to happen in the future, maybe we should have more conversations about what we should be doing right now. And you know what? I don't think retreating and basically having an attitude of going and living in a bunker is what we have been called to do as Christians. It does appear that the post-millennial mindset is more in agreement with Christianity in the first century. But somehow along the way, we got the idea that last days meant the 2000s, even though they were in the last days in the first century. And so because we are in whatever we consider the last days, we're just, letting the sinking ship go down. And it's like now the rules have changed because it's 2025, where the post-mills seem like they're doing a better job of thinking more like they did in the first century. And I don't want to be outdone by the post-mills, and I especially don't want to be outdone by the Calvinists. Let's get these things right. And so thank you for watching this. Make sure you like and share this. And thank you for the recommendation of this documentary. Continue letting me know if there's any more you would like me to review. And hopefully we'll have some good conversations and reviews about those things. So thank you for watching. God bless.